Thank you very much, Kati, and a warm welcome today, live and online from ITB. My name is Katharina Stechel. I am the Program Manager of the Roundtable Human Rights in Tourism, and I am delighted to be your host and moderator for today's session, which is entitled The Forgotten Majority, Informal Workers in Tourism. I am actually only here as a representative of several organizations that helped to organize and to contribute to this session. So I would like to name them and express my heartfelt thanks. These are ECPAT Germany, the Studienkreis für Tourismus und Entwicklung, Institute for Tourism and Development, Brot für die Welt, Bread for the World, and the Roundtable. And talking about these two organizations, that actually already brings me to my first speaker. Antje is head of Tourism Watch, a specialized organization of Bread for the World, the development organization of the Protestant churches in Germany, and chairwoman of the Roundtable. Antje, thank you so much for joining me and not leaving me alone here in the studio.
Thank you, Katharina.
We all would have loved to have an ITB presence event, but the online format gives us the chance of bringing in people that otherwise could not have been here. And with this, I'd like to welcome Agnes Rodriguez. She's a passionate tour guide, and she has been president of Aguigat for 2 years. Aguigat yesterday won the To-Do Award Human Rights and is an association to defend the interests of licensed tour guides. Agnes, hope you can hear us, and maybe you can tell the audience from where you're tuning in today. Okay, Agnes, I don't know if the audience can hear you. Can you please unmute yourself, Agnes? Because we can't hear you here. Okay, we'll try it first with Graham Jackson then and see if we can solve these technical issues in the meanwhile. Graham, you're head of strategic partnerships at the Travel Foundation in UK. Graham, in one sentence, could you maybe tell us what is the key objective of the Travel Foundation?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
You can, okay. I could hear Agnes fine, so I'm not sure what's happening there. Yes, delighted to be here this afternoon. The Travel Foundation is an organisation that seeks to really try and understand and improve the impacts of tourism. So that's my one sentence. Looking forward to contributing to this discussion today.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So we try it once more with Agnes. Can you hear us?
Now?
Ah, there you are. I'm delighted that worked. These are the technical differences that you always have on an online setting. Agnes, thank you so much for being here. And from where are you tuning in today?
Thank you for inviting me. And we are speaking from Barcelona.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. With that, our panel is actually completed and introduced. And let me spare a moment to give you an insight of what we're actually talking about today. When I talk to you, to the audience, when you think of a tourism stakeholder, who do you think about? Maybe a tour operator, maybe a hotel manager, but would you think about a street vendor, or a small accommodation owner, or an art performer? Probably you wouldn't. The informal sector actually generates income and employment just for themselves. And they're mostly based on casual labor and personal relationships rather than contractual agreements. So they lack social protection. They only have a few labor rights and often no decent working conditions. Informal workers in tourism are everywhere, and still they are way too often overseen. This problem is actually not new, but it has worsened dramatically during the pandemic. So we want to shed light on the informal sector and why it is so important for the restart of tourism, where the opportunities and challenges lie, and we actually want to have the local people have their say. That's why we included several videos that show insights and voices from destinations during this event. So according to the ILO, more than 60% of the world's population on the world's workforce work in the informal economy. So that is indeed a majority. And the ILO estimates that out of these 80% from these 2 billion people, they have suffered massive damage due to the pandemic, and especially in the worst hit sectors such as tourism. And behind these numbers, there are personal and individual fates. And now we want to take a look at a video from the Studienkreis and tour guides from Bolivia and Brazil that show the devastating effects of COVID.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claudia Mitternieder, and I'm the Managing Director of the Institute for Tourism and Development, in German called Studienkreis für Tourismus und Entwicklung. In our various projects, we critically and constructively deal with the opportunities, risk and responsibility of tourism development. One of our projects are the intercultural tour guide seminars, which we offer since more than 20 years. In these practical seminars, guides are trained and sensitized for their task. The objectives of the seminars are to better understand development and the global context and to address the exploitation and behavior of tourism in order to give participants the knowledge to be better facilitators between cultures. Through our trainers and our e-learning platform, we are still in close contact with most of our trained guides, even during the pandemic. We have asked them how they have managed to survive and what are their plans for the future. And these are 2 examples which are more or less representative for them all. Have a look.
Hello everyone, my name is Irit. I'm a tour guide from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm here to tell what's going on after and in the time of the pandemic. And in Brazil, our government didn't support us so much. Only for a year, they used to support us with between 25-50 euros per month, and that's it. And my principal clients used to be international ones, and about the countries and airports was all closed. And I have no clients to tour.
My name is Gloria, and I'm from La Paz, Bolivia. I have been a guide for over 30 years. Us guides, that is my colleagues, we never thought in a wildest dream that something like this could happen. I mean, this pandemic with the coronavirus has really been devastating on all of us. Can you imagine? In 1 second, the world stopped. Some of us are ahead of our homes. We are the ones that provide for our family, and now we don't have anything. I mean, some of my colleagues are selling in the street everything that they can't. We're doing everything to survive.
I decided to look for another talents that I could work. And then I became a holistic therapist and also a writer, helping people with their issues of traumas and emotional issues. And nowadays I decide to keep in this area, and maybe tourism is gonna be my hobby.
Yeah, these were really moving and heartwarming statements that we actually received here from Bolivia and Brazil. And I would actually like to turn to Agnes directly. You are a tour guide yourself for over 15 years. And we've heard about the situation in these 2 countries. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about the situation in Spain, of the effects of COVID, and especially for the informal sector? So, for example, free tour guides.
Okay, so in Spain, if you were paying your taxes, so if you're a professional, you were getting some help from the state since the very beginning. That was a really good thing. That happens in most countries of Europe, not all of them, but in some of them. But about free tours, it's different most of the times, because free tours are working for companies that are getting money from the guides after they have done the tour. So the taxes they were paying it's not the same way. They are just being exploited by the companies. So you are getting a tip as a salary, and that doesn't help that you can have a stable, financially stable in during the whole year. And during a pandemic, that was more and more evident in all around the world, not only in Barcelona.
Yeah, that actually shows the problem, right? That these companies don't take any responsibility for their clients and for their tour guides. And actually, that also brings me now to Antje. We have heard these examples from Bolivia and from Brazil and now also from Spain. And with your global perspective, what do you think? Like, what is your assessment of the development of the informal sector worldwide under COVID?
Sure, the situation differs from country to country, but what all those countries have in common, that people in the informal sector were hit first and were hit hardest by the pandemic. Specifically vulnerable groups in this group of informal workers, being it female informal workers or migrant workers. So the situation is different from country to country, but I want to look at the similarities that that we see an increase in informality due to the COVID situation. So it's one thing what the tour guide from Brazil was telling, that she's leaving this sector, that's one point. But at the same time, new people are entering this sector. For example, the free tour guides, but also new business models in the gig economy, so free drivers, etc., who are entering this market. And those companies behind it, and there are companies behind it, those people are not, they are working for themselves, they are carrying the risk, but there are companies behind who are benefiting from this vulnerability and also from the flexibility that we see in COVID. So people want to book last minute, they want to have freedom until the very last moment. So this leads not only to a severe situation for people in the informal sector, but also to informal working contracts. So we have the issue of 0-hour contracts, we have the issue of outsourcing. All of this was there before COVID, but it's increasing significantly. And I think what we can see is that companies, as a result of this experiences of crisis, are trying to reduce their risks, and they are reducing it by putting the risk to the people in the destinations, being them in the formal or in the informal sector. So we have both, and I think it's very important to see this together, that the informality as such is increasing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that totally also reflects what Agnes was just mentioning from Spain. When we talk about the start for the restart, so what to do if people are already in these conditions and work in the informal sector. In this case, we also have another example. So the Roundtable and PATA actually collaborated to hire furloughed tourism professionals and incoming tour operators to conduct trainings for over 500 informal workers in Thailand and assist them in preparing to safely and effectively welcome back international visitors and get livelihoods back. And now we want to look how this works in the following video.
Most of our informal workers in Thailand, they lost their jobs. It seems to be like 90% of them. Mm-hmm. So they hope that the government or any organization can provide them to get more chance to work and even to get more income back. So on behalf of PATA, we can train them. We can provide more training about new normal tourism, and we also provide them about the training on the child rights and also digital marketing and social security. Unbelievable. not only to train them, we also get a lot of benefit from this training as well.
Well, we divided into 3 categories: tourism-based communities, personal contacts such as tuk-tuk drivers, long-term boat captain, and the individual informal workers. For the tourism-based community, we contact the leaders and then we made an appointment. For our guides contacts, such as the tuk-tuk drivers, we call them first and then to make an appointment. For the individual informal workers, such as the street vendors, we go on site, we talk to them first, and we make appointments with them. We learned a lot from this training. I'll give you some popular topics that people really like. First one is the how to use ATK or the self-administrators COVID-19 antigen test kit. People like this topic a lot because we show them how to choose it. Child rights or child protection. People never aware of this before. They don't know the rights, children's rights. Now they really, and when they heard about it, they really, really appreciate that we told them about it. We also motivate people to be a child-safe movement. This one can be one of the models that we can use in the local communities as well. Also, the basic healthcare. This topic is very popular too because we advise them how to use a proper face mask, how to wear it, and the importance of the vaccines, and also the difference, how to choose your hand gels, etc. Yeah, I believe that the government can also support all of this equipment, such as face mask or hand gel for free. I believe that tour operators and travel associations that can apply these projects to raise funding from the tourism development organizations or local destinations and spend the budget for training projects, just like PATA did, like this one. And I believe that it's going to be helpful for the countries. And also this will be helping the informal workers to prepare for reopening country for tourism.
Wow, very good conclusion. So thank you very much for both of you for your time today. Thank you. Bye-bye. สวัสดีค่ะ
We are ready for the reopening Thailand.
Yeah, that video actually showed how to conduct these type of trainings and also the risk and demands for the informal sector. And with that, I would like to turn to Graham. Graham, what are actually the key factors to better integrate and especially reach out to the informal sector?
Thanks. Yeah, I think what that video really showed is that there is much more to tourism, to your tourism sector than simply thinking about the kind of the traditional players, and perhaps there's almost certainly a risk to not engage these stakeholders because they do form part of your tourism offer. So if you're trying to present your destination as a certain type of product, a certain type of offer, it's imperative that you do create that dialogue. But the techniques for doing so are obviously slightly more complex, as explained in that video. You're going to have to approach it in a different way. People aren't necessarily represented in the typical ways. So you want to speak to hotels, you go to the hotel association. You want to speak to guides, you might go to a guide association. How do you actually reach people, taxi drivers, street vendors, and so on? It does take slightly different approaches. So really, for engaging, you need to be quite innovative. You need to take approaches like this, actually go out on the street and create those relationships. And quite often the skills, the capacity to do that within businesses, within DMOs just doesn't exist. So this is something we need to build the capacity of people to be able to do in a much better way.
Yeah, building capacities and especially dialogue. These are two keywords that you mentioned, and I think this dialogue is essential in order to reach out to the informal sector. And also the informal sector actually has the capacity to address certain issues that wouldn't be possible to solve without the informal sector. And one example of that is the exploitation of children in travel and tourism. And how the informal sector can actually help here can be seen in the last video that we have for you from ECPAT and Paniamor in Costa Rica.
Milena Grillo, I work with the Fundación Paniamor as a Director of Strategy and Innovation in Costa Rica. Well, out of our experience working against commercial sexual exploitation, participation of the non-formal sector is key. They can really be one of the best partners you can have in terms of helping educate tourism about what are the values and the culture of the country and what do they have to abide by. They are the first informants for tourists, about what's going on, where do I go, what I'm expected to do. And if they do that on behalf of the children and the protection, they will do a lot of good. If we don't include them, then we have a great risk because they may become either they don't look at what's happening, and they don't care, or they help the exploitation of children. So we need them as they are unique partners, and we really need them on board. Our main learnings in this field arise from a project that we developed almost 10 years ago with the support of the International Bureau of Children's Rights and the Caribbean Cooperation. It was a project that targeted 2 territories in the Costa Rican Pacific coast, which are specifically recognized as high risk for different types of crimes, including commercial sexual exploitation. And also, what was very strategic is that we targeted non-formal tourism operators, which are, thousands of them in every place. And we were able to engage them as partners in the initiative. We use different methods in terms to, for example, do training, but not the classical workshop training. We did night movies with families to discuss the issue. We did face-to-face discussions at the beach. We engaged the participation of youth, from local youth, to present what were their concerns, their experiences that they need for protection. So it was very different, very unique social mobilization, so supported by awareness campaigns that were also included, for example, surfer trainers, doing campaigns, surf tournaments in favor of the project. So it was fantastic, and it really. Then the rest of the institution in the localities joined, the municipality, the sector, the health sector, the education sector. But really, the community led this initiative, and the non-formal operators of tourism were the key piece to this effort, which already we keep as a very glad memory.
I think this video specifically showed how important it is to actually include all stakeholders in the dialogue. There must be a self-understanding for companies to engage in their due diligence, but there must also be government instruments and legislation in order to monitor this. Because it doesn't help to just drop a regulation. There must be an understanding and agreement for various needs of the stakeholders, and they must be taken serious. So there is actually no need to abolish the informal sector, but there is a need to actively involve it. And that requires awareness, and it requires understanding on why the inclusion and the consideration of the informal sector also makes economic sense. And that actually brings me back to Graham. What do you think? I mean, in the end, despite doing good, it comes down to cold hard money, right? So in your opinion, what is the business case for including the informal sector?
Well, you're absolutely right. Tourism is an economic sector. That is the main driver. This is why tourism kind of exists. There's lots of other benefits as well, of course, but it is the driver. And the informal sector is trying to make a living. as is the formal sector. And quite often they're making their living from the same guests. So, if you think about it very much in that way, that there is a nexus there. A visitor does not just come to a destination to stay in your hotel. It's likely they might go on a trip with a guide. They might eat at street with a street vendor. They might experience a cultural experience in the street. So the recognition of that actually there is potentially a risk from not involving them. Potentially there's a lose-lose situation you could in fact create if you try and put up barriers, if you try and abolish particular ways that people are trying to make a living. That's a big risk. So I mean, we've certainly seen in our projects that when you actually find the common ground, when you actually can bring people together to have that dialogue, when you can actually get them to understand each other's perspective, what each other is trying to achieve and how they could achieve that better together, then ultimately it leads to a better experience for your guest. Your visitor is going to have a better holiday. They're going to have a more authentic experience. They're going to have a deeper level of cultural exchange. So it just makes a lot of sense that we start sort of, rather than looking at these the informal sector as rivals, that we actually look at them as colleagues and collaborators that can ultimately help us to deliver better travel experiences.
I specifically liked when you were saying turn lose-lose into win-win, because this is what it's actually about. But still, there is a need for companies to take their responsibility serious. And Agnes, I would like to bring you here in again. Why do you think it is vital for companies to take responsibility to themselves, but at the same time have legal regulations?
I think that it's vital to have legal regulations for inhabitants and for tourists. If there's no regulation, people can try to make their living by being exploited instead of just having the rights. So the state has to protect everyone, formal and informal sector, if they cannot get formal. But what we cannot do is that companies can come to any country and whatever they want, pay taxes whatever they want, and don't be part of make this win-win, because the win-win has to be good quality work options. For example, in Europe and in all around the world, but in Europe we have, for example, the free tours. These free tours, they come here, they make people pay their taxes to become guides. They get part of the tip the guides are getting, and they are paying taxes. The taxes they are paying in Ireland, not in the country these guides are working. And these guides are working maybe one day, maybe not. Maybe they go to work and they come back empty hands, or even they have to pay to the company because they didn't get enough tip to pay as much as they needed. So as a free tour, how it works is that you get a tip to the guide, and the guide has to pay part of that tip to the company. So if you're getting €5, maybe the free tour is getting only 2 of it because the other 3 are going to the company. So the system and everyone has to be really aware of how it works to avoid joining and being part of this exploitation.
Yeah, what you just mentioned really showed why we also need official regulations and government regulations, because even if there is a good wish, it's not enough if companies don't act accordingly. And Antje, from your perspective and also experience at Tourism Watch, what do you find crucial to support and work collaboratively with the informal sector, especially when it comes to legal requirements?
I think we really have to be careful that we put the people, the rights of the people at the center, but that additionally we need rules for the companies. So it's not to put everything who is in the informal sector into a direction of being nearly criminalized. This would harm the situation for those people who are trying to make a living, but we need clear rules for companies. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, they are this international framework under which companies have to take responsibility for human rights. Unfortunately, it's not, it's voluntarily. So some countries started to develop national action plans, but in more and more countries, governments are developing supply chain laws where it's clearly described what the responsibility of companies is. The EU, the European Commission, last week, 2 weeks ago, presented their directive on corporate sustainability due diligence. That's a very, very important point. It is focused on all companies with an annual turnover of over 150 million. So for the tourism sector, it's not that many, but when we are looking, for example, at the free tours, etc., it's big companies behind it. So they would be obliged to this legislation. What is behind it is that companies are demanded to conduct risk and impact assessment analysis on human rights violations along the supply chain, and they are forced to provide access to remedy to those who are who experience human rights violation. The European law incorporates particular regulation on or a long list of potential human rights risks related to working conditions. That's very, very important, and a lot of them is also connected to the informal sector. But at the same time, there's a weakness because it's only addressing established business relationships. So I think the reality will show how this balance turns out. And I'm quite optimistic that because the informal sector in tourism is so large, and what Grammar said, the business case should be so obvious for the long-term success of the business as well as the resilience of destinations, that this responsibility also for people in the informal sector will be strengthened through this global legislation, or not global, but for this international legislation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we as the Roundtable are, of course, always campaigning how important human rights in tourism are, and that there is a business case for respecting human rights in tourism. As we haven't heard from him, maybe I bring Graham in again and let you have your share on what do you think about these legislations and the necessity of it.
Yeah, I think, you know, anything that we can do to sort of provide more frameworks, more rights for people, not just in tourism, you know, has to be applauded. And I think that you have to question why there's such a large informal economy within tourism. It's so important, but you know, why is it there aren't pathways that they're supporting people to kind of formalize, to support entrepreneurial ambition and so on. So I think, you know, definitely legislation like this really helps to start to, you know, really tackle some of those issues. But I think one of the big things that we're gonna find is that things will get more challenging. You know, we're going to definitely see, you know, more perhaps greater rise in things like the gig economy that perhaps do start to chip away at some of these rights. So we've just got to be very mindful of that and ultimately try and ensure that you know, that we're not turning our sector into something that is forcing people into sort of hand-to-mouth kind of work, that actually it's creating decent jobs, decent livelihoods, because this has a direct correlation on the quality of the product. So, you know, if you want tourism to be part of your economy, then you really need to try and make sure that you know, that it is not temporary work, it is not seasonal work, it is not you know, it is not work that is precarious. You know, that's a big risk to your destination.
Absolutely, and I think you also mentioned the business case here once more, and also the fact that informal workers are actually not the enemy. They are more the victim, especially if companies tend to exploit their contractors because there are no legal requirements. Our time is almost up, so I would like to use the last minutes to have a last statement from all of our panelists. And maybe we start with Agnes. Can you give us your final statement on the relevance of the informal sector to build back better in 1 minute?
As I'm coming from the formal sector, sometimes we can feel that, as you said, they are the enemy. The informal sector could be the enemy. But it's not, as you said, they are exploded. So the danger for the tourism right now is that the informal sector gets higher because a lot of people need to work. but then the precarity of the whole sector that is precarious itself from the beginning because of the cleaning women, because of the waiters that have low salaries. So we have to help between the whole tourism system to have a better tourism. But a better tourism doesn't mean only better clients, but means also better job positions.
I totally agree. Graham, is there anything to add from your side in your final statement?
Yeah, just something that we're acutely aware of at the Travel Foundation with our work on climate change. I mean, that's something that's going to potentially also have a bearing on this. If you think about the Global South in particular, where there are large amounts of informal tourism workers, the impact of climate change is going to have an impact on those livelihoods even further. It's going to put potentially some of the poorest countries even more at risk, make them even poorer. We've got to really try and address this situation in terms of supporting them with adaptation, with opportunity, with financing that they need to ensure that we're not creating generations of problems for the future.
Yeah, we touched so many topics actually today that we could talk about for hours and hours, but we don't have them. So Antje, 1 minute for your last statement on the relevance of the informal sector.
Yeah. I think we have to be clear that tourism is not since yesterday, but since a few years going in more crisis-torn situations. We see it everywhere. So people in the tourism economy, being them in the formal or the informal sector, they need protection and they need social security. So where does this means come from to pay for the adaptation that Graham mentioned in regard to climate change? Who is supporting those people in the informal economy to restart? So we have to think it more broader and get an understanding that there are companies who are benefiting from the system and from this developments in tourism. So putting them at the heart, for example, the question who is paying taxes and where are the taxes paid is very crucial to pay for this public services that are necessary, especially for people in the informal sector who are otherwise let alone.
Definitely something that would need more time to talk about, but our panel is over. I would like to sincerely thank all of my speakers and your valuable contributions. And to the audience, I hope we were able to shed a little light on the situation, of the precarious situation of informal workers. And we want to thank you and give you some ideas of how to tackle these issues and to have a restart in tourism that actually respects human rights and includes the informal sector. Thank you very much and goodbye. I give back to Katie.